The transport pod smelled of recycled fear. Myra had catalogued every scent aboard the Veth collective's holding vessel in the 72 hours since the raid on Station Kelvara: rust and ammonia, and the low fungal stench of the nutritional paste they pushed through the grates twice a day. But fear had its own chemistry, different from the others, almost metallic, something between salt and copper. She knew it from the other girls. 12 of them packed into a compartment designed for cargo crates, with walls that had once been labeled Perishable Transit Class 2. The label was still there. Nobody had thought to take it off. Myra was 13 years old, and she filed things away. She had been filing things away since she was small enough that filing had become a habit before she knew it was one. The label, still there. The grates, older on the left seam. The handler rotation, every 4 hours judging by footstep patterns overhead. The other girls, 12, ranging in age from 7 to maybe 14, from 5 different species, all of them female, all of them taken from the outer transit hubs of the interstellar corridor, where ID verification ran slow and oversight was a courtesy extended only to species with political leverage. Myra was Velshari. She had leverage, technically. Her people had negotiated observer status in the Federation treaty system, which sounded important, and in practice meant that the Federation would send a diplomatic note if something went publicly wrong. Notes, in her experience, were what happened after. They were not what happened during. She pressed her back against the cold polymer wall and pulled her knees to her chest. Her feet were bare. They had taken her boots at intake, a pair of expedition-grade silver-soled boots, the magnetic sole kind designed for low-gravity environments, which her father had given her for her last naming day. The handler who processed her intake had turned the boots over in his broad gray hands with the bored competence of someone who had done this particular thing many times, and dropped them in a collection sack with everything else. He had not looked at her face. The boots had her father's workshop markings on the left sole, a materials engineer's habit. He engraved a sequence code on everything he made or purchased, because he was a man who believed in provenance. Knowing where things came from was, he said, the first form of respecting them. Myra had memorized the code at age 5. She recited it to herself now quietly because she needed something to hold. In the corner of the compartment, a younger girl was crying without sound. It was the kind of crying that happens after the sound stops working, when grief has used up everything it had and the body keeps going on its own, the face doing the crying shape with no air behind it. Her name was Set. She was 7 years old. She had been separated from her elder brother during a transit rush in Kelvara's lower docks and had been in this compartment for 5 days before Myra arrived. She had explained this once, carefully and completely, on the first day. She had not explained anything since. She had stopped trying to explain things, and now she just sat and breathed and made the crying face. Myra moved herself carefully to sit beside Set. She put one arm around the smaller girl's shoulders. She didn't say anything. She just held her steadily, the way you hold something that needs to know it is not alone, and she felt the breathing slow just slightly, the way a panicked animal calms when something warm and non-hostile touches it. She had read about tactile grounding in a xenobiology text when she was 11. The nervous system defaults to the nearest mammalian presence that is not a threat. She had thought it was interesting, then, a fact to be filed. She had not known she was filing it for this. The pod shuddered. Deceleration burn. Something changing in the drive note. Myra listened to the hull vibrations the way her father had taught her to read material stress, not consciously, not analytically in the moment, but with the same patient whole-body attention she'd learned from him. Feel it before you measure it. The feeling told her they were approaching a significant gravitational body, station, or large vessel. They had maybe 20 minutes before the bay doors opened, and whatever came next would come. She looked at the other girls. She had spent the past 3 days doing what she always did with groups of people she didn't know, cataloging them. Who was still sharp? who had gone quiet but not blank quiet in the watchful way, the way that meant they were still processing, who had the specific quality of attention that suggested they were looking for the same things she was looking for. There were three. A Velshari girl her own age named Davy, who sat cross-legged with very straight posture and tracked the movements of everyone in the compartment the way you track things when you're trying to understand the system. A small Keth child called Ula, who barely spoke at all but whose enormous dark eyes moved with the constant, precise attention of a navigation instrument. And a human girl, actual human, from the Sol-adjacent systems, the genuine original species, not human-adjacent like the Velshari named Priya, who had been in the compartment when Myra arrived, and who had spent the first 2 days in a controlled, focused grief, and the third day quietly examining the great welds with her thumbnail. Priya. Myra had watched her for 3 days and decided she was the kind of person who, once she decided to do something, did it with everything she had. 20 minutes, Myra said quietly in corridor standard, low enough not to carry. Not a whisper. Whispers traveled in ways that quiet didn't. Whispers signaled that someone was hiding something, and hiding was different from being careful. Priya looked up from the grate. Her thumbnail was bleeding slightly. She didn't look at it. I know, Priya said. Same register. They'd been talking to each other for 3 days and had developed the shared economy of people who are being careful in the same space. The forward seam is thinner, Myra said. Left side of the panel. The weld is older than the right side. Different tool marks. Priya was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when she was converting information into a plan. Then, how do you know? Sound. When the hull cycles its pressure compensation, it resonates differently at different thicknesses. Thinner material resonates higher. She paused. My father is a materials engineer. I grew up listening to things. Priya looked at her for 1 second. Then she moved herself to the left side of the grate and began working it differently than she'd been working the right. Myra turned to the other girls. She looked at Davy, who was already looking at her, had been already looking at her, with the quality of someone who had been waiting to be looked at. Good. She looked at Ula, whose eyes had already shifted to the grate. Good. When the grate gives, Myra said to all of them, to all 12 in the quiet not whisper register, we move together, everyone. We don't stop for anything we see and we don't separate. If you're slow, tell me now. If you're hurt, tell me now. She looked at each face that was turned toward her. There is no version of this where we leave anyone behind. That's not what this is. She had not planned to say the last part. It came out of the same place the first things had come from, the filing system. The accumulated material, the years of her father saying that the worst thing you could do in a tight situation was treat someone as an acceptable loss before you'd actually established it was necessary. She looked at Set. I'll carry you, she said, if I need to. You don't have to worry about that part. Set looked at her with the wet, enormous eyes of someone who has been given back a small piece of something that had been taken from them. Priya at the grate made a sound. It was not a dramatic sound. It was the sound of a weld giving a quiet, metallic sigh, the kind of sound that belongs to a structural failure that was already waiting to happen, that needed only someone patient enough and determined enough to find it. Myra was already moving. The docking bay was not empty. She had counted on confusion. 30 seconds of scattered handler response time. The brief, beautiful chaos of an unexpected compartment breach while the vessel was docking, when attention was on the procedure and not on the hold. She had counted all of these things, and she was right about all of them. She had not counted on the Federation patrol craft parked in Bay 4 with its cargo door standing open, and she had not counted on the human. He was standing by a manifest verification station near the port bulkhead, tall, maybe 30 standard years, lean in the particular way of people who had spent a long time in environments that didn't accommodate excess, wearing the gray-green utilities of a Federation independent contractor. Not an officer, not military. The worn, practical, non-regulation kit that marked someone who lived in the outer systems by choice and had stopped performing for anyone about it years ago. He had dark hair that needed cutting, a jaw that needed something similar, and a datapad in his hand with multiple files open on it. He dropped the datapad when the girls came through the broken grate. She marked this. He didn't try to hold on to it, didn't look back at it. Let it go immediately, let go of the thing that had been occupying him, and turned all of his attention to what was happening in front of him. The handlers were 12 seconds behind them, maybe 15. He looked at the children, he looked at the handlers, he looked at the children again. The calculation was visible on his face. Not long, not complex, not involving, apparently, any of the things that the calculation should probably have involved, such as, "This is not my problem," or "I have no authority here," or "There are 6 of them and I am one and I am unarmed." All of those considerations happened and were apparently dealt with in a single second, and then he opened his mouth and said, "Get in." Not a question, not heroic. 2 words, said the way someone says a sentence when the body has made the decision before the mind finished running the numbers. The voice of a person operating from something more basic than calculation. Myra pushed Set through the door first. He got them off the dock by 12 seconds. She knew because she was watching the chronometer display on the craft's forward panel. She had moved to the edge of the cargo area where she could see it, because watching available information was what she did, and 12 seconds was the margin between docking clamps engaged and docking clamps cycling, and they went through on the cycling side, which meant the Veth station's automated systems registered an anomalous departure, but the manual override request hit the queue too late to catch them. He burned hard. She didn't know who he was or what he knew about the outer corridor, but she could feel what the burn meant in the quality of the acceleration. He was taking a heading that a standard response protocol wouldn't predict, something that cut through the less monitored freight transit corridors. The outer routes, the slow ones, the ones used by people who didn't need to be found. He knew where those were. He'd been using them for a long time. She sat in the cargo area with the other girls, most of them braced against the bulkhead, and for a while the dominant sound was breathing. All of them. 12 girls in a cargo bay breathing. Set was pressed against Myra's side with both arms around her and her eyes shut, and Myra held her and felt her own heart rate begin its slow descent from the emergency frequency it had been operating at for the last 4 minutes. He flew for 4 hours without coming back to them. She did not need him to. She understood, she thought, what kind of person this was. A person who did the thing and then let it be done, who didn't need to process it out loud or receive confirmation that it had been correct. He would come back when there was something useful to come back for. When he did come back, he had a box. Standard emergency ration box, the kind you found at transit depots across the outer corridor, dense protein blocks, electrolyte packets, calorie bars with the taste of nothing in particular but the density of everything necessary. He set the box down in the middle of the cargo area and said, "I'm taking you to a transit hub called Meridian 3. It's 3 jump points out. It has a real Federation presence, family liaison unit, the whole thing." He looked at the girls one by one with a quality of attention that Myra noticed and filed. He was actually looking at each of them, not performing looking. "You'll be safe there." Said simply. Said in the way of someone stating a thing they believe while knowing they cannot fully guarantee. The distinction was important. People who stated certainties they couldn't guarantee were people who needed their audience to feel fine more than they needed to tell the truth. This was not that. "What's your name?" Myra asked. He looked at her. She saw the recalibration happen, the brief adjustment people made when a child looked at them the way adults looked at each other, with full attention and the clear intention of understanding them. Some people found it unsettling. He didn't seem unsettled. "Cashin," he said, "Cashin Drell." "Thank you, Cashin," Myra said. She said it the way her father had taught her, directly, without performance, without making the thing smaller than it was. She was looking at him when she said it. She let him know that she had registered exactly what he'd done, and that registering it was not optional for her, and that she intended him to know she had registered it. Something shifted in his expression. It was brief. She didn't have enough experience with humans to know exactly what the expression meant, but she thought it was the face of a person who had just been given something they hadn't known they were waiting for. "Get something to eat," he said. "Sleep if you can. We'll be at Meridian 3 in about 18 hours. He went back to the cockpit. Myra sat with the ration box and organized distribution and thought, for the first time since the compartment, about the future. Not the immediate future, the outer future. What came after Meridian 3? What came after the family liaison unit, and the documentation, and the slow, painful process of returning 12 girls to whatever had been waiting for them? Her father would be waiting. She had memorized his comm codes before she was 5 years old. He would answer immediately. He would be out here within hours. He had friends in the outer routes, freight contacts, people who owed him favors. She would be fine. And Cashin would fly his route and file his report and move on to the next freight audit on his schedule. And she would go home, and that would be that. She thought about a person who said get in, without knowing what it was going to cost them. She thought about what it meant to be built that way, to have done enough risk calculations in your life that you stopped doing them in moments when the answer was obvious. She thought about the specificity of it. Not a soldier, not a hero, not someone whose job was to intervene. Just a contractor in a docking bay with a data pad and a ship that could break dock. She was 13 years old. She understood, with the absolute clarity that is sometimes available only to the very young, because the very young have not yet learned to distrust clarity, that she was not going to forget this man. The vow came quietly the way her people's vows came. Not a declaration, not a performance. A private interior thing, sealed in the body, a reorientation of direction. Her grandmother had described it once. It's like turning your face toward a light. You don't announce that you've turned. You just face the direction, and then you go. She turned. At Meridian 3, the liaison officers came. Cashin spoke to them in the efficient, economical way of someone who had filled out forms under duress many times, and had come to understand that the more clearly and completely you filled out forms, the faster the forms went away. He filed everything. He didn't minimize and he didn't editorialize except for one moment. When the senior liaison officer said this must have been very disorienting for you, and Cashin looked at him and said, "It wasn't the most disorienting thing I've done this quarter." The officer laughed. Cashin didn't. But he wasn't being unfriendly about it. He was just reporting accurately. Before the officers took the group away, Myra stopped in front of him. He was already pulling up his next routing information on a new data pad. He had a spare in the ship. Of course he did. "Cashin," she said. He looked up. She met his eyes. She had the Velshari eyes, what her mother called the seeing eyes, the ones that take in more than is comfortable. She was used to people finding them unsettling. Cashin looked back steadily. "I'm going to come back," she said. "When I'm older, I'm going to come back and find you." He looked at her for a moment. She watched him decide how to respond, and she watched him choose the honest response rather than the comfortable one, which would have been to agree warmly and then forget about it. "Get home safe, Myra," he said. It was not agreement and it was not dismissal. It was an acknowledgement that she had said something, and a wish for her well-being, and a space left open because he was not going to tell a 13-year-old what her future was going to look like. She went home safe. The years between were not waiting. That was the thing she would eventually understand about them, though she could not have articulated it at 13. She was not waiting for Cashin, she was becoming the person who could find him. The difference was significant. Waiting was passive. What she was doing was active, continuous, shaped. At 14, she was still a child in frame but not in bearing. She moved and thought and observed with a precision that her teachers found alternately impressive and exhausting. She studied materials engineering because her father was a materials engineer, and because she had, in 72 hours in a cargo compartment, discovered that the most useful knowledge she had was the knowledge she'd absorbed from him. The sounds of things, the thicknesses, the failures hiding in the welds. She studied navigation. She studied Federation contract law, which had been Cashin-specific work, freight audit, logistics compliance under Federation charter. She told herself this was because it was useful knowledge for anyone working the outer routes, which was true. She also told herself honestly that she was building the map of his world. At 15, she tracked the VETH collective prosecution through the Federation public records system. The documentation had been filed by a contractor identified in the public record only as C. Drell, Federation Outer Corridor Audit License. The tribunal cited the report extensively. She found the relevant sections through the database archive and read them 3 times, and then a 4th time, because they were written with the kind of precision that made a reader feel they were inside the events rather than being told about them. Every detail, every timestamp, the exact wording of what the handlers had said, the exact configuration of the compartment, the condition of the grates, the tool marks on the welds. He had noticed the tool marks. She had noticed the tool marks. She had told Priya about the tool marks. He had noticed them independently afterward as part of his documentation. She did not know why this mattered to her, but it mattered considerably. She tracked the family liaison outcomes. Set reunited with her brother within 18 hours, an outcome that made Myra sit still for several minutes feeling something she could not name, but that had the texture of having been correct about something important. Priya returned to her family in the Sol-adjacent colonies. 3 others placed in transitional care. Davi, the other Velshari girl, returned to her home station and, according to her public educational records, enrolled in the Federation Junior Technical Academy. Ula, family located through cross-species welfare coordination. All of them. All of them. She put that in the filing system. She kept it close. At 16, she was something in between, not child, not adult, the in-between stage that her people called the long growing, which was accurate because Velshari grew later than most human-adjacent species and then grew considerably. She was already tall. She would be taller. Her mother looked at her sometimes with an expression that was half pride and half something Myra could not name, and she asked once what the expression was for, and her mother said, "You look like someone who has already decided where they're going," which was, Myra supposed, accurate. She didn't tell her mother about the vow. It was hers. Her people's bond vows were interior things. You did not announce them to others because the announcement was not the point. The direction was the point, and the direction was her business. At 17, the shape settled. She was going to be tall and silver-skinned with her mother's jaw and her father's precision, and the eyes, the large violet eyes, the seeing eyes, the ones that cost her sleep. And she was going to be exactly the kind of person who could navigate the outer freight corridors and who spoke corridor standard with the accent of someone who had been practicing it her whole life. She had been practicing it her whole life. She had been practicing many things. At 17, she also had the conversation with her father that she had been approaching obliquely for 4 years. They were in his study, late in the evening, with the desk lamp making its small, warm circle and her father grading materials, samples from a consult job. She said, "Do you remember what I told you when I came home from Meridian 3? He stopped grading. He put the sample he was holding carefully in its tray. He had always given her the gift of his full attention when she asked for it. "Yes," he said. "I'm going to go look for him," she said. "When I'm working. When I'm old enough to work the outer routes. I'm not going to prioritize it over my work, and I'm not going to abandon my good judgment because of it, and I'm not going to expect anything specific to happen, but I'm going to go look." Her father was quiet for a moment. He had the Velshari patience, the long consideration before speech, the refusal to let the mouth outrun the mind. "Is it still him?" he said finally. "Or is it what he did?" "I've been thinking about that for 4 years," she said. "I think it's both. I think when you're 13, you can't separate a person from their defining action. You don't have enough data yet. But I've been carrying what I know about him for 4 years, and what I know isn't just the action. It's how he filed the report. It's the way he spoke to the liaison officer. It's the specific form of honesty he used when I thanked him. He didn't pretend to feel things he didn't feel, and he didn't reject the gratitude. He just received it accurately. That's a person." She paused. "I want to find out if the person I've been thinking about is the person who exists." Her father looked at her for a long time. "Your grandmother will have things to say about this," he said. "I know, I'll talk to her." "Your mother?" "I'll talk to her too, later, when there's something to report." She looked at him. "I'm telling you now because you're the one who taught me what I used in that compartment. The sounds, the thicknesses, the welds. You gave me what I needed to get out. I wanted you to know that I'm using the same method for this." Her father was still for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face. One of the rare, complete shifts, the ones he didn't make often, that meant something had moved him entirely. "Go," he said, "when you're ready. And tell me how it goes." At 18, she began working outer corridor routes as a junior auditor with Soli's Meridian Logistics, a small firm, low margins, which meant actual work and not a lot of hand-holding, which suited her. She was good at it immediately, in the way her father was good at things, not through native genius but through filed observation applied systematically. She knew how freight manifests should look and how they actually looked, which were different things, and she knew the sound of a stressed weld and the feel of a certification that had been signed too quickly, and she had, it turned out, an excellent memory for names and routing numbers. She worked the routes for 8 months. She met people. She learned how the outer corridor functioned below the level that texts captured, the informal trust networks that held transit hubs together, the specific silences that different kinds of cargo produced in different kinds of vessels, the rhythm of an audit culture that moved at its own pace and didn't apologize for it. She liked it. She would have liked it anyway, she thought. She was her father's daughter. She also worked her way through the Federation contractor database. She was not searching him. She was building competence in the system she would be working in for the foreseeable future, and understanding who the experienced contractors were and what their specializations were was basic professional due diligence. C. Drell Outer Corridor Freight and Logistics Audit, currently active, current licensing status, good, current registered route coverage, Keth Station Cluster. She applied for an audit assignment in the Keth Station Cluster. She prepared herself for many contingencies. The one she felt least prepared for, when she walked through the station entry port and saw him at the manifest verification desk, was for what his existence would feel like after 6 years. He was 6 years older, and the outer routes had continued their project of wearing him to the exact things he was, the dark hair shorter now, close-cropped. A scar along his jaw that hadn't been there before, pale against the skin, the kind that comes from something fast and imprecise, the same lean economy of movement. He was reading a datapad and frowning at it with the concentrated displeasure of someone finding errors they hadn't expected to find. She sat at the adjacent verification station. "Drell," he said without looking up, "you're on the audit team." "Myra Vell," she said, "independent contractor. We're both on the Keth Station manifest review." He looked up, professional assessment. She gave him a moment. She was good at giving people moments. "Right," he said. "I didn't get the full team list." He studied her outer corridor professional shorthand, experienced person evaluating a colleague's apparent level of experience. She watched him do it and felt nothing defensive about it. It was a legitimate evaluation. You've done these before. Outer corridor mostly. Some secondary system work. He nodded. The primary system people have trouble out here. Expect documentation standards that don't exist. He looked back at his datapad. What firm? Solis Meridian Logistics. About 8 months. He paused, something in the name. She had known it would be in the name. Meridian 3 was where he'd taken them. He would remember it. You came through Meridian 3. She had prepared for 17 different versions of this conversation. She had not prepared for him to find the door himself. Yes, she said. He looked at her properly then, not the professional assessment, something slower and more specific. He was not a person who moved to conclusions quickly. She had known that from the beginning, but she had also known that he moved to them accurately. She watched him looking at her face, her eyes, the silver skin. Myra, he said, one word, not quite a question. Yes, she said. He was quiet for a moment. She had prepared for discomfort, for deflection, for the complicated negotiation of gratitude and past-event awkwardness that sometimes developed between adults who had shared an emergency and then had to encounter each other in ordinary life. She had prepared for ambiguity and difficulty and the careful work of establishing a new register between them. She had not prepared for him to look the way he looked. Like someone setting down something heavy they had been carrying, without noticing they were carrying it. You got home safe, he said. I did. The other kids. All of them. I tracked the outcomes. The Veth handlers were prosecuted and sentenced. She paused. Your report was the primary documentation used in the tribunal. The judges cited it 14 times. He looked at his thermal mug, put it down, looked at it again. Good, he said. He stopped. Good. That's exactly what you said when I thanked you on the ship, she said, in exactly the same way. He looked at her sharply. She met it. What did you come out here for? He asked. His voice had a directness to it now that hadn't been in the professional assessment register. Actually. You're working, I can see that, but what did you come out here for? He was not slow. She had known he wasn't slow. You, she said. Simply, without performance. The way her father had taught her, directly, without making the thing smaller than it was. He said nothing. I was 13, she said. I understand what that means and what it doesn't. I know that what I decided at 13 was decided by a child in a specific set of circumstances, and that I can't hold you responsible for a vow you weren't told about, and that I can't arrive here expecting anything specific just because I've thought about you for 6 years. She held his gaze steadily. I'm not here to claim anything or demand anything. I'm here because when I try to understand what kind of person I want to be, what kind of attention I want to pay to the world, what kind of choices I want to make when the moment comes, and there's nobody watching, I go back to you. To a man who said get in without calculating it first. I wanted to find out if the person I remember is the same as the person who exists. He was very still, the kind of stillness that is not avoidance, not discomfort, but full attention. She had learned to read the difference. 6 years, he said. 6 years. You were 13. I was. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back. She had the seeing eyes. She was used to people finding that uncomfortable. He looked back at her with steady, honest attention, and she thought, yes. Yes, this is the same person. I thought about that day, he said. More than most days, what happened after. I moved on to the next route because that's how I work. You move on to the next route, but I thought about it. He paused. I thought about you specifically. The way you talked in the bay. Get me that age again, and I don't know if I manage half of that. You get the vow, she said. That's the part I couldn't have managed without you. Something crossed his face. She filed it. She would be filing his expressions for a long time. The freight audit runs 5 days, he said. Yes. You're here for all of them. That's my contract. He picked up his thermal mug, put it down. Okay, he said. She waited. Tell me about the Solis Meridian protocols, he said. I want to understand your documentation standards before we start on the manifest. She let the smile come. She didn't hide it. Hiding it would have made it smaller than it was, and she had learned from him that the worst thing you could do with something real was diminish it. Start with the intake indexing system, she said. It's more sophisticated than the standard outer corridor approach. 5 days is both very long and very short, depending on what is happening in them. They worked. They were good at it together in the way that sometimes happens between people with different skill sets oriented toward the same underlying thing, minimal waste motion, an intuition developing for where the other's attention was and leaving it to them, a quiet efficiency that had no self-consciousness about it. She handled the manifest documentation because her training was more recent and more systemized. He handled the physical inspection protocols because he'd been doing them for 11 years and had developed the specific sense for a space that you only get from extended time in it. He knew which bay welds to trust and which to flag. She noticed him noticing this and did not mention it. She did not need to mention it. She had always understood that the most useful things in her life had come from him indirectly. She wasn't keeping score. On the second evening, over dinner in the crew lounge, he told her about the routes he'd worked since Meridian 3. She told him about her family. He told her about his, a brother in the Sol-adjacent colonies doing agricultural systems work, parents who had retired from freight but not from the adjacent life of it, the warm, specific affection of people whose industry had made them. She listened to the way he talked about them and thought, his family gave him the same things mine gave me. Different specifics, same shape. On the third day, walking a cargo corridor for a physical inspection, she asked him why he stayed in the outer systems. He could work the primary routes, better documentation standards, more predictable income, less uncertainty. He considered it the way he considered everything, without rushing to an answer, with the patience of someone who thought that rushing to answers was a form of disrespect to the question. Out here is where things are still open, he said. The primary systems, someone's already made every decision. Every contingency is accounted for. Out here something can still surprise you. My father says something similar, she said. He calls it frontier fever. He says he doesn't know what to do with himself in an environment that doesn't need him. Cashin looked at her. That's exactly it. He paused. Your father sounds like someone I'd like to talk to. He'd like to talk to you, she said. He glanced at her sideways. She looked forward. On the fourth evening she told him about the boots. The silver-soled expedition boots that the Veth handler had taken, with her father's workshop code engraved on the left sole. She described the code. She still had it memorized, the same as she had at 13. She said, the reason I could tell you about the tool marks and the weld thickness was that I grew up in my father's workshop touching everything he made, listening to how materials sound under different conditions. Those boots had the markings of someone who cared about provenance. She said, I have thought about those boots many times over the years. Not because I want them back, but because they reminded me what it meant to know where something came from. He was quiet for a while after that. The report mentioned tool marks on the grates, he said. I know, I read the report. You noticed them too. I'm why they were exploitable, she said. I told Priya where to work. He looked at her. You were 13 years old. I was my father's daughter, she said. On the 5th day, the last day of the audit, they sat in the crew lounge with the final documentation between them and worked through it in the comfortable silence they had developed. She knew by then the particular quality of his concentration, the way he leaned slightly forward when he was working on something he wasn't sure about, the habit of setting his mug down and picking it up again when he was processing something. The precise quality of his handwriting in the sections he annotated by hand. She did not tell him she knew these things, she just knew them. When the documentation was complete, he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. She watched him do it, this brief surrender to an open space after focused work, and recognized it. Her father did the same thing. "What happens after this audit?" he said. "I go back to my firm and take the next assignment," she said, "which is what I was going to do regardless." And she looked at him. "And I wanted to tell you what I told you on day one. I wanted to tell you all of it properly, not in a hallway in the middle of a working day. I've told you about the vow. I've told you what I came out here looking for." She paused. "I'm not asking you to feel what I feel. I know that I've had 6 years to think about you, and you haven't had 6 years to think about me. I know the distance is not equivalent, and I'm not pretending it is. I'm asking if you're willing to find out if there's anything there, on your side, that wants to be found." He was quiet for a while. The quality of quiet she had learned to recognize as him giving something actual, full attention. "What does that look like?" he said, "practically?" "Same routes," she said. "We're working the same corridor cluster. I can make that sustainable. Not because I'm following you, because I want to work these routes and you work these routes, and those are two true things that happen to point in the same direction." She looked at him steadily. "Time. It looks like time and honesty, and the kind of work we've been doing for 5 days." He was quiet for another while. "I've been working outer routes for 11 years, he said. "I know what this life is. It doesn't build around things that need stability." "My father has been working outer routes for 30 years, she said. "He and my mother have been bonded for 25 of them. They solved it." Something shifted in his expression. She couldn't name it precisely. She was still building the vocabulary for his face. "Okay," he said. She waited. "I don't know what this is yet," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I know what you feel. I don't know yet what I feel. I know," he paused. "I know you're the same person I remember. I can see that. And I know that what I remember mattered to me in some way I didn't do much with because I didn't know what to do with it." He looked at her. "I'm willing to find out." She nodded, slowly, with the weight of something that had been coming toward her for 6 years and had now arrived. "That's what I came for," she said. The Vila's circuit that followed took 7 weeks. She transferred to it through a legitimate dual-firm arrangement that her manager at Solis Meridian approved in about 45 minutes, which told her either that her manager trusted her judgment or that the Keftavella's route was genuinely underserved by auditors. Probably both. She learned him the way she had always learned things, by paying attention, by filing, by allowing the filed observations to arrange themselves into understanding without forcing them. She learned that he was a meticulous and unapologetic cook in the specific way of people who had decided at some point that eating well was a form of self-respect that required no audience. She learned that he slept poorly and didn't mind it, that he worked in the middle of the ship's night cycle and considered it extra time rather than lost rest. She learned that he held a principled grudge against sloppy documentation, not as a professional affectation, but as a genuine ethical position. She learned that he was funny, in a dry, understated way, not performing humor, just occasionally noticing something worth noting. She found him in the galley at 3 station hours on the 4th night. She had been awake, as she was often awake. She had made herself coffee substitute without expecting company, and then there was company. They drank it at the small galley table and talked about the manifest discrepancies they'd flagged that day. And she told him about a similar discrepancy from an audit she'd done the previous year. And he told her about a Keth Station situation from 2 years back that had the same signature. And somewhere in the conversation, they stopped talking about work and started talking about other things. And 2 hours disappeared. After that, the 3 station-hour conversations became a feature. Neither of them mentioned them. They just happened. On the 5th week, anchored at the villa's waypoint during a secondary audit review that nobody had wanted but everyone had agreed was necessary. She sat with him in the ship's forward observation deck. The villa's dust cloud was visible through the port, not spectacular, by outer corridor standards, but with a specific red-gold quality in this light that made it feel like something. He said, "Tell me about the vow again, all of it, not the short version." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I want to understand it properly. I don't make decisions without information." She told him. The tradition, the practice, the interior quality of it, not a declaration to the other person but a commitment of direction, a way of pointing yourself. Her grandmother's description, it's like turning your face toward a light. You don't announce it, you just face it, and then you go. She told him how her grandmother had made her vow at 16 and found the person 12 years later and recognized them on sight. How her mother had made hers at 19 and met her father 3 years later and known. She told him that the vow was not a claim. It was not a demand. It was information about what she had decided, offered without attachment to the outcome, because that was what honesty required. "And you chose this at 13, he said. "Yes. After what happened." "Because of what happened, not exactly, because of what you did in what happened." He looked at the dust cloud. The red gold of it shifted by increments. "Can I ask you something I've been trying to figure out how to ask?" "Yes." "Is the vow about me," he said, "or about the kind of person who does that thing?" She had thought about this for 6 years. She had thought about it more carefully in the past 7 weeks than she had in the 6 years before. "Honestly," she said, "at 13, I couldn't have separated them. I didn't have enough reference points yet to know the difference between a person and a defining action. But I've spent 6 years building reference points, and I've spent 7 weeks watching you work and argue with bad documentation and make food that is significantly better than the situation requires and appear in the galley at 3 in the morning, with the same expression I have at 3 in the morning, which is, awake and not sorry about it." She met his eyes. "It's you. Not the thing you did, though I haven't forgotten it and I won't, and it is part of you, it's where I found you. But what I came here for is the person." He was quiet for a long time. The dust cloud burned its slow red gold. "You know what the most surprising thing is," he said. "Tell me." "The most surprising thing is how unsurprising it is," he said. "Sitting here, talking to you, 7 weeks of," he stopped. "Then, I've been working alone for a long time. I got used to it. I thought I preferred it. I thought that was the version of this life that worked for me." He looked at her. "I don't think I preferred it. I think I just stopped noticing that I didn't." She said nothing. She let him have the space to finish the thought. "Okay," he said quietly, with the weight of something decided. She felt it land, the third okay, each one heavier than the last, each one meaning more than the word. The first had been provisional. The second had been considering. This one had the weight of conclusion. "Okay," she said back. She did not make the vow again. It was made. It had been made for 6 years. It was held in the body now, and what remained was not the making but the moving, the sustained direction, the thing her grandmother had called the real part. She was 19 years old. She was pointed in the right direction. She knew exactly where she was going. Outside the port, the dust cloud moved the way things move that have been traveling through space long enough for speed to be irrelevant. Not fast, not dramatically, but with the enormous accumulated momentum of something that had committed to its direction a very long time ago. She called her father from the villa's waypoint, while the secondary audit finalized its paperwork. He answered on the second chime. Behind him, the study, the ordered sample shelves, the desk lamp, the particular tidiness of a mind that arranged its environment to support its work. He looked at her for 2 seconds and said, "Something happened." "Is happening," she said. "It's ongoing." He waited. He had always been good at waiting. "Do you remember," she said, "when I came home from Meridian 3? What I told you. I remember, he said. I found him, or I arranged to find him. The difference might be semantic. He was quiet for a moment, and it's correct, she said. He's the person I thought he was. He's also things I didn't know about yet, which is better. Her father looked at her from 400 light-years away, through a screen, in the small, warm circle of his desk lamp. Your grandmother, he said slowly, will have a great deal to say about this. I know, tell her the vow is honored. He was still for a moment. Then something happened in his face, one of the rare complete shifts that meant he had been moved entirely, and was not going to hide that he'd been moved. Tell me about him, he said. So she told him. She told him about the freight audits and the documentation standards, and the way he worked a cargo corridor, and the 3-station-hour conversations, and the food, and the sound of him in the ship's galley at 3 in the morning, and the 12-second decision that had never been only a 12-second decision, but everything a person was that made that kind of decision available when the moment came. Her father listened to all of it. When she finished, he said, he sounds like someone who has been doing good work for a long time without needing anyone to notice. Yes, she said, exactly. Bring him to meet us, her father said. When there's time. The next circuit passes near enough for a detour in about 4 months. 4 months. Her father smiled, his restrained smile, which was still warm enough to carry across the distance. Your mother is going to be impossible. I know, I'll message her before we arrive. Send me the route details, he said. I'll check the transit times. She ended the call and sat for a while in the forward observation deck alone. Cashin was doing the final walkthrough on the bay. She could hear him. The systematic movement from station to station. The efficient progress of someone who had been checking bays for 11 years and could do it in his sleep. He came in eventually with 2 cups of coffee substitute. He set one in front of her without asking if she wanted it. He knew she wanted it. She had thought about that, the way that knowing a person, real knowing, made certain questions unnecessary. You just did the thing, and the thing was right because the knowledge was there. She took the cup in both hands. You look like you're holding something large, he said. I was talking to my father, he wants to meet you, she paused, in about 4 months. He looked at his cup, set it down, picked it up again, the grounding mechanism. She knew it now, all the ways he anchored himself, and she felt not sentiment about it but something accurate and specific that she was glad to know. 4 months, he said. The next circuit comes near enough to route through. I'd need to coordinate with the Keth Station Authority on the timing. I know. I already looked at the scheduling window. There's a clean gap in the 3rd week. He looked at her. The expression she had been trying to name for 7 weeks, she had it now. It was the face of someone who had expected to navigate a complicated thing alone and had discovered that it was already navigated. You looked at the scheduling window, he said. I was awake at 3 in the morning, she said. I had time. He laughed, the involuntary one surprised out of him. She had counted 16 instances of it. She would keep counting. She suspected there would be, over the time that was coming, more instances than she could practically count, and she was prepared to stop counting and simply experience them, which was its own form of filing. Okay, he said. She smiled. Outside the port, the dust burned its slow red gold. The way things burn that have been moving through the dark for a very long time without drama, without announcement, with nothing but the enormous quiet fact of committed direction. She held her coffee and watched it, and thought about her grandmother who had turned her face toward a light at 16 and followed it for 40 years, and her mother who had turned at 19 and recognized the person on sight 3 years later, and she thought, yes, this is how it goes, not in declarations, not in grand moments that announce themselves. In 5-day freight audits and 3-station-hour conversations, and the sound of someone making food in a small kitchen at the end of a long corridor, and the quiet specific okays that accumulate over time into something that cannot be taken back. 3 months and 12 days later, she was counting, but loosely, the way you count things you're not trying to control. She stood in the cargo bay of a medium hauler at the Keth Corridor waypoint and watched her father shake Cashin's hand. Her father had that look, the one she'd seen when she told him about the documentation report, the one she'd seen when she called from Vila's, the rare complete shift. He was reading Cashin the way he read materials, not for surface impressions but for underlying structure, for what the composition told you about how something had been made and what it was capable of bearing. Cashin, for his part, was steady. He always was. Her father said something about the Keth Station certification discrepancy they'd filed the previous month. He'd seen it in the public records, from his consult work, and Cashin talked about it with the same precision he brought to everything, the clean, layered explanation of someone who had thought it through from multiple angles and was ready to explain any of them. Her father listened with his whole attention. The two of them stood there talking about a freight manifest certification, and Myra stood to one side with her arms folded and felt something settle in her chest that had the specific quality of long-gathered things arriving at their right place. Her mother cried. This was expected. Her mother was a person who cried at large things and did not find crying embarrassing, which Myra had always respected even when it made her uncomfortable. She was direct about it. She held Cashin's hands and looked at him and said, "She was 13 when she came home. Do you know what she was like at 13? And he said, "I can guess." And her mother said, "You can't actually. You'd have to have known her." And Cashin glanced at Myra and then back at her mother and said, "I'm beginning to." Her mother cried harder. This was also expected. Her grandmother, who was 103 years old and had made her vow at 16, and kept it for 40 years, and outlived the person she had pointed herself toward by 23 years without ever reorienting. Because that was not how the Velshari worked. Her grandmother sat in her good chair and watched all of it with the eyes. The family eyes. Violet, enormous, the kind that take in more than is comfortable. When Myra came to sit with her, her grandmother took her hands and held them for a while without speaking. She had always done this. She believed that the hands told you things. "He is what you said," her grandmother said finally. "Yes. And he knows what you are." "He's learning," Myra said. "So am I." Her grandmother looked at her, the old eyes, the deep ones. "The learning is the point," she said. "The people who think there's a finish line to it, they're the ones who stop." She squeezed Myra's hands and let them go. "Don't stop." "I won't," Myra said. On the last evening before Cashin had to take the next leg of his route, they sat outside. Her parents had a small observation terrace, high enough to see the transit corridor lights above the cloud cover, the slow-moving lights of vessels working their way through, and he told her something he had been working up to for a while. She could tell he had been working up to it. She had learned his tells. "I've been thinking about extending my license coverage," he said, "into the Velshari corridor." She looked at him. "It's a legitimate expansion," he said. "There's work there. The documentation infrastructure is better than the Keth cluster." He paused. "It would mean passing through here more regularly." "How regularly?" she said. 3-4 times a year," he said. "Standard circuit rotations." She thought about this. She thought about the routes, the scheduling, the practical geometry of two people building a shared life across freight corridors. Her parents had solved this problem for 25 years. She knew it was solvable. "You need to file an expansion application," she said. "I know, I've started the paperwork." She looked at the transit lights above the cloud cover, the slow, patient movement of them. Every one of those lights was somebody making a calculation, committing to a heading, going where they were going. "Okay," she said. He turned to look at her. She looked back. She felt the smile coming and let it come. "Okay," he said. "That's my word," she said. "You've been using my word." He laughed. The involuntary one, the surprised one, the one she had been counting since the beginning and had now given up counting because there was no practical ceiling. She did not count it. She simply heard it, the way you hear things when you have stopped waiting for them and started living in them. She was 19 years old, and she was going in the right direction. That was enough, and it was everything.